In 1982, you could walk into a Pontiac dealership, sign a few papers, and drive home in a brand new sports car. Mid-engine, 2 seats, sharp angles, pop-up headlights. It looked like the future, and behind your head, bolted to a transverse cradle, was an engine most Americans already hated, the 2.5-liter Iron Duke. On paper, it was just an inline-four, 151 cubic inches, cast iron block, cast iron head, 2 valves per cylinder, a single cam buried in the block. Nothing exotic, nothing glamorous, nothing that would make a car enthusiast's heart beat faster. But what almost nobody knows is that this engine wasn't born to be loved. It was born out of crisis. And the real story behind the Iron Duke isn't about horsepower. It's about survival. Because in the late 1970s, General Motors wasn't fighting for trophies. It was fighting to stay relevant. You think you know this engine? Not like this. By 1973, the party was over. The oil embargo hit like a sledgehammer. Gas prices doubled overnight. Lines stretched around blocks at filling stations. Then came emissions regulations. The Clean Air Act tightened the noose around Detroit's neck. Compression ratios dropped from 11:1 to barely 8.1. Catalytic converters choked exhaust flow. Insurance companies started punishing anything with a V8 badge. Young buyers couldn't afford coverage on muscle cars anymore. The golden age of muscle cars didn't just fade, it collapsed. And GM had a problem, a big one. Their bread and butter engines were big V8s, small block Chevys, big block Oldsmobiles, Pontiac 400s and 455s, torque monsters built for wide-open highways and cheap fuel. These were engines designed for a different America, an America where gas cost 30 cents a gallon, an America that believed bigger was always better. But now customers wanted efficiency, reliability, low operating costs. They wanted to know how many miles per gallon, not how many horses under the hood. 4-cylinder engines were the future. The trouble? GM didn't really have a good one. What they had were outdated, underpowered designs that couldn't compete with rising imports from Japan. Toyota and Honda were building lightweight, efficient 4-cylinders that revved freely and sipped fuel. Datsun was gaining market share every month. Meanwhile, Detroit was scrambling. Executives were panicking behind closed doors. Market research showed younger buyers were abandoning American brands entirely. Something had to change. So in 1976, Pontiac engineers got to work on something brutally simple. A clean sheet inline-four built like a truck engine. They called it the 2.5-liter. Internally, it became the Iron Duke. And that name wasn't marketing hype. It was literal. The block was thick cast iron, deep skirts that extended well below the crankshaft centerline, massive main bearing caps that could handle stresses far beyond what this engine would ever produce in stock form. The crankshaft rode in 5 main bearings. Most 4-cylinders of the era used only 3 or 4. GM chose 5 for maximum rigidity and longevity. Bore measured 4.0 inches. Stroke stretched to 3.0 inches. That gave it 151 cubic inches of displacement. A perfectly square bore-to-stroke relationship. Engineers chose this ratio deliberately. It balanced durability with low-end torque. It minimized piston speed at any given RPM. It reduced wear on cylinder walls. This was engineering for the long haul. Compression ratio? Around 8.2.1 in early emissions-era trims. Later versions climbed slightly higher, depending on year and application. Some reached 9.0.1 as fuel quality improved and emissions equipment became more sophisticated. It wasn't designed to rev to 7,000 RPM. It was designed to survive. Early carbureted versions made about 85 horsepower. Torque was roughly 130 pound-feet. Not impressive by any standard, but the torque peak came low, right where commuters lived, around 2,800 RPM. You didn't need to wring its neck to merge onto the highway. You didn't need to downshift for every hill. And that mattered more than magazine numbers, because GM wasn't building race cars. They were building lifeboats. The Iron Duke first appeared in 1977, models like the Pontiac Sunbird and Chevrolet Monza. Compact cars, modest expectations, practical transportation for practical people. But the Duke quickly spread across the GM empire like wildfire. It found its way into the Chevrolet Citation, the Pontiac 6000, the Oldsmobile Omega, the Buick Skylark. Every division needed fuel-efficient options. By the early 1980s, it was everywhere. Showrooms across America featured the Duke in everything from economy cars to light trucks. Production lines ran constantly. Suppliers scaled up operations to meet demand. And then GM did something bold. They put it in a sports car. In 1984, the Pontiac Fiero debuted with a 2.5-liter Iron Duke mounted behind the driver. A mid-engine American car for under $8,000. This was unprecedented. Ferrari charged hundreds of thousands for mid-engine layouts. Lamborghini was for millionaires. But here was Pontiac offering the same basic configuration for the price of a loaded pickup truck. The Duke in Fiero trim produced about 92 horsepower and 132 pound-feet of torque. Fuel injection replaced carburation. Throttle body injection, specifically. A single injector spraying into the intake stream. It was crude by modern standards, but it was a step forward. 0 to 60 took around 11 seconds. The quarter mile passed in roughly 18 seconds at about 75 nm. Not exactly Ferrari territory, but the layout, the styling, the promise, it captured imaginations. Young buyers saw themselves in something exotic, something different, something that looked like it belonged on a poster. And then the complaints started. Owners expected sports car performance. What they got was economy car thrust wrapped in an exotic body. Magazines criticized it harshly. Car and Driver famously described the acceleration as underwhelming. Road and Track questioned why GM bothered with the mid-engine layout if they weren't going to provide matching power. The engine sounded coarse at high RPM, industrial almost. It ran out of breath past 5,000 RPM because that long-stroke, heavy rotating assembly simply wasn't meant to spin fast. The disconnect was painful. Here was a car that looked like it should run with the best, but drove like it belonged in a rental fleet. But here's what most people don't realize. The Iron Duke was never supposed to be in a sports car. It was supposed to keep GM's fleet fuel economy numbers alive. Corporate average fuel economy standards, known as CAFE, were tightening every year. GM needed efficient vehicles to offset their trucks and full-size cars. The Fiero, with its Iron Duke, delivered. At 25 to 30 miles per gallon on the highway, it did exactly that. It was a regulatory compliance vehicle disguised as a dream car. But there was a darker chapter, and this is where the hate really began. Early 1984, Fiero models experienced engine fires, not because the Duke was fundamentally weak, but because connecting rods in some early engines failed under sustained high RPM loads. Owners didn't understand the engine's limitations. They revved it to redline constantly. They held it at maximum RPM on highway on-ramps. They drove it like a sports car. When a rod punched through the block, oil sprayed onto hot exhaust components mounted just inches away. Flames followed. Investigations revealed multiple contributing factors. Some engines had lower than ideal oil capacity. The Iron Duke held around 3 to 4 quarts depending on configuration and year. That's thin margin for error. Under heavy use, oil temperatures climbed, viscosity dropped, oil starvation could occur, bearings would fail, rods would let go. News coverage was devastating. Images of burning Fieros spread across newspapers and television. The car became a punchline. GM eventually issued recalls. Oil capacity was increased. Components were strengthened. Connecting rods were revised. But the damage to the engine's reputation was done. Permanently. 4-cylinder time bomb, some critics called it. But was that fair? Let's dig deeper. The Iron Duke used a simple pushrod valve train, 2 valves per cylinder, hydraulic lifters that required no adjustment. No overhead cam complexity, no timing belts to snap. That meant fewer moving parts, fewer components to fail. The camshaft was gear-driven in some early versions, eliminating a timing chain altogether. Others used chains so robust they rarely needed replacement. The bottom end was overbuilt for its power level. Thick cylinder walls meant it could safely handle small overbores during rebuilds. Typically 0.030 inches without compromising structural integrity. Some machinists went further. The crankshaft was robust for its output range. It was designed with margins that luxury imports wouldn't match. This was an engine designed for 200,000 miles, and many of them made it, often far beyond. Fleet operators loved it. Taxi companies ran them into the ground and they kept running. Postal services relied on them for daily routes through brutal conditions. Delivery companies put hundreds of thousands of miles on them without major repairs. Base model commuters who just needed their car to start every morning found exactly what they needed. In S-10 pickup trucks, the Duke delivered usable torque at low RPM. Around 135 pound-feet in later trims, perfect for hauling light loads, not fast, but utterly dependable. By the mid-1980s, output crept upward. Later versions with improved fuel injection and revised cylinder heads pushed closer to 100 horsepower. Some applications reached 105 horsepower and around 135 pound-feet of torque. Still modest, but consistent, predictable, reliable. Production numbers were massive. Over its lifespan from the late 1970s into the early 1990s, millions were built. The exact count varies by source, but estimates suggest well over 5 million units left factories. It powered everything from compact sedans to Jeep DJ mail trucks. Yes, even AMC and Jeep used variants of the Duke after GM supplied them through business arrangements. It was everywhere, in every city, on every highway. So why did America love to hate it? Because in the 1980s, image mattered. This was the decade of turbochargers, intercoolers, multi-valve heads. Japanese engineering was pushing boundaries. The 2.3-liter Ford Lima Turbo was making 145 horsepower in Thunderbird turbo coupe form. Chrysler's 2.2 Turbo hit 174 horsepower in Shelby trims. Even imports were pushing 120 horsepower from similar displacements with naturally aspirated designs. The Duke, by comparison, looked ancient. No cross-flow head, no overhead cam, no high-revving drama, no turbo whistle, no intercooler bulge, just iron and torque. It belonged to an older philosophy, an older way of thinking about engines. While competitors embraced technology, the Duke stubbornly remained simple. But here's the twist. In motorsports, the Iron Duke quietly proved something. In the early days of the Indy Fiero program and other grassroots racing series, modified versions of the Duke showed surprising durability. Weekend warriors discovered that the block could handle serious abuse. With forged internals, upgraded oiling systems, and better breathing through ported heads, racers could push well beyond 150 horsepower. Some circle track builds exceeded 180 horsepower from the 151 cubic inch platform. That's more than double its stock output. Drag racers experimented further. Some turbocharged examples pushed past 200 horsepower. The block could take it because it was built thick. Mechanics who tore them down often said the same thing. It's ugly, but it's tough. And tough was exactly what GM needed during the malaise era. By 1987 and 1988, the Fiero finally received the 2.8-liter V6 producing 140 horsepower. Suddenly, the car felt alive. The promise of that exotic body was finally matched by adequate thrust. 0 to 60 dropped into the 8-second range. Quarter-mile times improved dramatically. Reviews turned positive. Enthusiasts took notice. But by then, the Iron Duke had already defined the car's reputation. Pontiac canceled the Fiero after 1988. Corporate politics, insurance costs, liability concerns. Total production reached just over 370,000 units across 5 years. Many of those early models were Duke-powered. The car that could have been America's affordable exotic died before reaching its potential, and enthusiasts never forgot or forgave. Meanwhile, the Duke continued soldiering on in trucks and base model sedans. Invisible, unloved, but working. It became known as the engine you couldn't kill. Taxi fleets reported staggering mileages, 250,000 miles, sometimes 300,000. Oil changes and basic maintenance kept them humming indefinitely. But the world was changing. By the early 1990s, overhead cam engines became the standard. Multi-valve heads dominated. GM introduced the Quad 4, dual overhead cams, 4 valves per cylinder, 150 horsepower in base form, up to 180 in high-output trim. It revved past 7,000 RPM. It felt modern, sophisticated, exciting. Compared to that, the Duke looked prehistoric. Production of the 2.5-liter Iron Duke effectively ended in the early 1990s, after nearly 2 decades of service. Tooling was retired. Factories retooled for new designs. A new era began. No farewell ceremony, no tribute, no retrospective articles. Just quiet retirement. So what's the real legacy? The Iron Duke didn't win Daytona. It didn't dominate Le Mans. It didn't set quarter-mile records. A stock Fiero with a Duke never threatened a Corvette. It never graced the cover of magazines for performance achievements. But it kept GM afloat during one of the hardest transitions in automotive history. It met emission standards when those standards seemed impossible. It improved fleet fuel economy when regulators demanded better. It provided reliable transportation to millions of Americans during uncertain economic times. It powered affordable cars that regular families could actually buy when money was tight. And sometimes, that matters more than horsepower. You can laugh at 92 horsepower today. You can mock its 5,000 RPM redline. You can joke about the tractor sounds. But consider this. An engine with a 4.0-inch bore and 3.0-inch stroke, built entirely from iron, making modest power at low compression, surviving 200,000 miles in millions of vehicles across nearly 2 decades of production. That's not failure. That's endurance. Most people remember the jokes, the slow Fiero, the economy special, the engine that sounded like agricultural equipment at highway speeds. But beneath the criticism was a simple truth. The Iron Duke did exactly what it was designed to do. It survived an era that killed legends. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast. It wasn't even particularly smooth. But it was there. Morning after morning, winter after winter, mile after mile. And in a decade defined by crisis and compromise, sometimes being unbreakable was the greatest achievement of all. That's why Chevy's Iron Duke 2.5L became the engine America loved to hate, because it reminded people of what they lost, but it also carried them into what came next. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most misunderstood engines of the malaise era, let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Another forgotten 4-cylinder? A legendary V8 rivalry? Or a race engine that changed everything? Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because sometimes the engines everyone laughs at have the most interesting stories of all.